Montana Territory, 1875. The fading sunset cast long shadows across the desolate plains as Margaret Vance huddled against the side of a battered stagecoach. At 22, she had never imagined finding herself so utterly alone in the wilderness. Her emerald green traveling dress, once the pride of Boston society, was now torn and dusty from her desperate flight. The golden blonde hair that her father had once praised as her greatest asset for securing a suitable husband had fallen loose from its pins, cascading down her shoulders in tangled waves. The stagecoach jolted to a stop. "End of the line, miss," the driver called. "Welcome to Silverwater." Margaret stepped down into the mud of what barely qualified as a town, a single dusty street lined with weathered buildings. This remote outpost was nothing like the Boston she knew, but that was precisely why she'd chosen it. Nobody would think to look for her here, especially not her father or the 50-year-old business associate he'd promised her hand to. A woman needs protection in this world. Her father had insisted the night she fled. "You'll thank me when you're living in comfort as Mrs. Harrington." Margaret clutched her small valise containing all she had left, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, and $27. Not enough to start a new life, but enough to keep moving if necessary. She'd escaped one fate only to face another equally uncertain one. The frontier, she'd decided, was a place where only the hardened survived, and love was a luxury no sensible person could afford. "You look lost." The voice startled her. Margaret turned to find a young man watching her with curious blue eyes. He couldn't have been more than 25, with sandy brown hair and a face that seemed too kind for the rugged surroundings. Despite his youth, his shoulders were broad under a worn leather vest, and a holstered pistol hung at his hip. Not threatening, merely practical in this untamed land. "I'm perfectly fine," she replied stiffly, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "Luke Thatcher," he said, tipping his hat. "And judging by that carpetbag and those city clothes, you're about as fine as a calf in a coyote den." "Margaret Vance," she answered reluctantly. "I require lodging for the night." Luke gestured down the muddy street. "Widow Jenkins takes in boarders, but she's full up with the cattle buyers in town. Hotel burned down last spring." He paused, studying her face. "My sister's cabin has a spare room. She'd welcome the company, especially from someone who might have news from back east." Margaret hesitated. Every instinct told her to trust no one, especially not a man, no matter how genuine his smile or how those blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he spoke. "I assure you, Miss Vance, I'm only offering shelter. Whatever you're running from, it's none of my business." His perceptiveness unsettled her. A cold wind swept down the street, and Margaret shivered. Night was falling, and with it came the realization that she had nowhere else to turn. "Very well, Mr. Thatcher. I accept your offer." The cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of pines, smoke curling from its chimney into the twilight sky. Luke's sister, Sarah, a sturdy woman with the same kind eyes as her brother, welcomed Margaret without prying questions. Over a simple supper of venison stew, Margaret fabricated a story about traveling to meet a cousin, a tale neither Thatcher appeared to believe but politely accepted. "Luke's got the best horse ranch this side of the Yellowstone," Sarah said proudly. "Started with 2 Maras after the war, built it all himself." Luke shrugged. "It's modest, but it's mine. 28 horses now, good stock." His modesty struck Margaret as unusual for a man with such an accomplishment. That night, lying in Sarah's spare bed, Margaret fought back tears. The safety she felt in this simple cabin was temporary. Her father would not give up easily, not when his business merger with Harrington depended on the marriage. She'd escaped one cage only to find herself trapped by the harsh realities of frontier life. Without skills or connections, her independence would be short-lived. The next morning, Margaret awoke to the sound of hoofbeats. Peering through the window, she saw Luke astride a magnificent chestnut stallion, guiding a herd of horses toward a corral. He moved with the animals as if they shared a language, his body relaxed yet commanding. "He has a way with them," Sarah said, appearing behind Margaret. "Even the wild ones eventually trust him." "I'm afraid I must move on today," Margaret replied, turning from the window. Sarah's expression grew serious. "With $7 to your name?" "Yes. I counted your money when you dropped your purse last night." She held up a hand to stop Margaret's protest. "You need work, and we need help. Luke's business is growing, and I can't manage the house and the ledgers alone. I don't know the first thing about horses, but you can read and write beautifully. I noticed your handwriting in that book you carry. And judging by how you corrected yourself at dinner when speaking about finances, I guess you know your way around numbers too. Margaret felt her cheeks flush. She'd been careful not to reveal her education, thinking it would mark her as an outsider. $3 a week, plus room and board, Sarah continued. And no one asking questions about why a Boston lady is hiding in Montana. Margaret's throat tightened. How did you know? Your accent. And those shoes. Nobody around here has shoes that fine. Sarah smiled gently. Stay, at least until you have enough saved to truly choose your next step. Through the window, Margaret watched Luke dismount, his movements fluid and confident. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she considered what staying in one place might mean. 1 month, Margaret agreed. Then I'll decide. As April turned to May, Margaret found an unexpected rhythm in ranch life. Her mornings were spent organizing Luke's chaotic ledgers, afternoons helping Sarah with household tasks, and evenings sitting on the porch listening to Luke's stories of the horses he trained. He never asked about her past, though she occasionally caught him watching her with curious eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. You've doubled his income in 3 weeks, Sarah remarked one afternoon as they hung laundry. He actually knows where his money's going now. It was simple accounting, Margaret demurred. Anyone could have done it. Not anyone did. You did. Sarah pinned a sheet to the line. He's different since you came. Talks more. Margaret felt a flutter in her chest she quickly suppressed. Mr. Thatcher is merely pleased with improved business. Luke, Sarah corrected. Out here, formalities just waste breath. That evening, Luke found Margaret sitting alone by the corral, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, settling beside her on the fence. Different from eastern sunsets. How would you know? She asked. Have you been east? A shadow crossed his face. Army. Saw the end of the war when I was 17. Saw enough to know I preferred sunset over open country to sunrise over battlefields. Margaret studied his profile. You don't seem like a soldier. Most men aren't, until circumstance makes them so. He turned to her, his expression open. Just like most women don't flee across the country alone unless circumstance forces their hand. The air between them seemed to still. My father arranged a marriage, she finally said, the words tumbling out. To a man 30 years my senior, who views wives as property to be acquired. I refused, so my father locked me in my room until I'd come to my senses. I climbed out the window with what I could carry. Luke nodded slowly. Brave thing to do. Foolish, she corrected. I had no plan beyond escape. Sometimes escape is the only plan that matters. His hand rested inches from hers on the fence rail. What will you do when your month is up? Margaret looked out at the horses grazing in the evening light. For the first time, the thought of leaving filled her with a strange hollowness. I don't know, she admitted. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, addressed to Sarah, but clearly meant to reach any Thatcher in the area. It was from a private detective agency in Boston, inquiring about a Miss Margaret Vance, describing her with unsettling accuracy and offering a substantial reward for information. They found me, Margaret whispered, her hands trembling as Sarah handed her the letter. Not yet. They haven't, Luke said firmly. His steady presence at the kitchen table anchored her as panic threatened to overwhelm her senses. This is just a fishing expedition. They're sending these to towns throughout the territories. I need to leave. Tonight. Margaret stood abruptly. If they come here, you could lose everything for harboring me. Sit down, Luke said, his voice gentle but brooking no argument. Nobody's losing anything, and you're not running again. You don't understand what my father is capable of. I understand that you've built something here. Luke's eyes held hers. The horses know you now. The accounts are in order. Sarah smiles more. And I. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. The ranch is better with you on it. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. The letter had shattered the peace she'd begun to feel. From her window, she saw a light still burning in the barn. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she crossed the moonlit yard. Luke sat at his workbench, carefully tooling a piece of leather. You should be sleeping, he said without looking up. As should you. She moved closer, seeing that the leather was a small bound book. What are you making? Account book. Proper one, not those loose papers you've been using. He set down his tools. Thought it might convince you to stay longer. Margaret touched the carefully crafted cover. Luke, I know you think the frontier is no place for a woman raised like you were, that it's all hardship and loneliness. He stood, suddenly looking younger than his 26 years. But there's more to it. There's freedom here. Room to build something that's truly yours. Or to lose everything in a moment, she countered. A bad winter. Disease. Outlaws. Yes. He stepped closer. But you face those things with people who stand beside you, not because of arrangement or obligation, but by choice. His proximity made her heart race. In 2 months, he'd never stood this close. Why did you really offer me shelter that first day? She whispered. Because you looked lost, and brave, and beautiful. The simplicity of his answer stole her breath. And every day since has only proven I was right about all three. When his hand gently cupped her cheek, Margaret knew she should step away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, allowing herself to acknowledge what had been growing between them. Something tender and unexpected, something she'd never felt in Boston's gilded parlors. His kiss was hesitant at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, Margaret rested her forehead against his shoulder, confusion and desire warring within her. I can't stay, she whispered, though the words felt like a lie. Luke's arms remained around her, solid and warm. Then I'll give you enough reasons to change your mind. June brought cattle drives through the valley, and with them, business. Ranchers seeking fresh mounts and travelers needing reliable horses found their way to Thatcher Ranch. Margaret's precise bookkeeping and Luke's honest dealings earned them a growing reputation. Each evening, they would walk the property together, planning expansions to the corral, discussing which mares to breed, their conversations flowing with an ease that still surprised her. I used to think success meant being left alone, Luke admitted one evening as they sat watching the horses in the summer twilight. After the war, I couldn't stand being around people much. Figured I'd just build something quiet and keep to myself. Margaret glanced at him. What changed? You showed up. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her now sun-bronzed skin. Made me realize a successful ranch isn't much if there's no one to share it with. The tenderness in his voice made her chest tighten. In the 2 weeks since their kiss in the barn, something fundamental had shifted between them. What began as a temporary arrangement had become something neither was willing to name yet, but both felt growing stronger each day. I received a letter from my mother's sister in San Francisco, Margaret said. She's offered me a place to stay, away from my father's influence. Luke's hand stiffened in hers. When would you leave? I haven't decided if I will. She squeezed his fingers. For the first time in my life, I'm making my own choices, and I find I'm reluctant to leave what I found here. His smile was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. The next morning, riders approached the ranch, 3 men in city clothes, out of place against the Montana landscape. From the kitchen window, Margaret recognized the lead rider instantly. Her father's lawyer, Mr. Patterson. They've found me, she whispered, backing away from the window. Sarah immediately closed the shutters, while Luke moved to the door, hand resting on his pistol. Miss Vance is not here, Luke told the men when they inquired. We have information suggesting otherwise, Patterson replied smoothly. Mr. Vance is offering $500 for his daughter's safe return, a substantial reward for a modest operation such as yours. Margaret trembled in the darkened kitchen, hearing the thinly veiled threat beneath the offer. Nothing modest about honest work, Luke replied evenly. Unlike hunting down a woman who's clearly made her choice to leave, the lady is promised in marriage. A legal contract has been signed. Not by her, I'd wager. The tension stretched until Patterson finally said, We'll be staying in town. Should you reconsider, or should Miss Vance make an appearance, our offer stands. After they departed, Margaret collapsed into a chair. They won't leave without me. Luke knelt before her, taking her shaking hands in his. Then we'll have to convince them you're not worth waiting for. His blue eyes held a determination that steadied her. Do you trust me? Yes, she answered without hesitation, surprised by how completely she meant it. The plan came together quickly. Sarah rode to fetch the preacher and 3 neighboring ranchers who owed Luke favors. By noon, the small party gathered in the ranch house parlor. Margaret wore her green traveling dress, cleaned and mended over the months, and wildflowers in her hair. Marriage won't stop them entirely, Luke had explained, but it changes the legal standing. A husband has more rights to protect his wife than a ranch hand has to protect a visitor. Is that the only reason you're suggesting this? Margaret had asked, searching his face. His answer came without pretense. I love you. I think I have since you stepped down from that stagecoach. But I would have waited years to tell you if these men hadn't forced our hand. Now, standing before the preacher, Margaret felt surprisingly calm. This was nothing like the arranged marriage she had fled. This was a choice, freely made, born of both necessity and something deeper that had grown between them through shared work and quiet evenings. I, Luke, take thee, Margaret. His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke the vows. When it was her turn, Margaret's voice rang clear through the small cabin. I, Margaret, take thee, Luke. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was witnessed by Sarah, the preacher, and the 3 ranchers who would ride into town afterward, spreading news of the hasty wedding at Thatcher Ranch, ensuring the information reached Patterson and his men. That night, alone in Luke's cabin bedroom. Now theirs, Margaret whispered. This isn't how I imagined my wedding night. Luke's fingers traced her cheek with reverence. How did you imagine it? I never dared imagine one where I chose the man, she admitted. Where love preceded the vows. Is that what this is? He asked softly. Love. Margaret looked at this man who had offered shelter without demands, who had seen her strength before she recognized it herself. Yes, she said, though I didn't know what to call it until today. His kiss was tender, unhurried. They had a lifetime to discover each other now. The confrontation came 3 days later. Patterson and his companions rode onto the ranch as Margaret was helping Luke with a new foal. She straightened as they approached, no longer hiding. Miss Vance, Patterson began. Your father, Mrs. Thatcher, she corrected firmly. And you are trespassing on our property. Patterson's mouth tightened. A hasty marriage doesn't nullify your prior commitments. Luke stepped forward. There were no prior commitments. Only arrangements made without her consent. Mr. Vance will contest this marriage. He'll have it annulled. On what grounds? Margaret challenged. I am of legal age. I married of my own free will. And the marriage has been consummated. She felt her cheeks flush, but kept her gaze steady. My father has no claim on me now. Patterson studied her face. Then Luke's, seeing the united front they presented. Mr. Harrington will be most displeased. He was counting on the merger your marriage would secure. Then he should find a willing business partner, not a reluctant bride. Margaret took Luke's hand. Please inform my father that I am well and happy, but I will not be returning. Something shifted in Patterson's expression, perhaps respect, perhaps simply resignation. He won't send your inheritance. I don't need it. The certainty in her voice surprised even her. I've found something worth more. After the men departed, Luke pulled her into his arms. They might come back with more than threats. Then we'll face that together, she replied. I'm not running anymore. August brought scorching heat, and the news that Margaret's father had indeed attempted to contest the marriage, only to be thwarted by the wedding witnesses and the territorial judge who had little patience for Eastern interference in Montana affairs. September brought the completion of the new barn, built with the help of neighboring ranchers who had come to respect the young couple. By October, as golden aspen leaves drifted across the ranch yard, Margaret knew she was carrying their child. Standing in the kitchen, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, she watched through the window as Luke worked with a spirited colt, his patience unwavering as the animal tested boundaries. You're going to be a wonderful father, she said when he came inside, his questioning look turning to astonishment as he understood her meaning. His whoop of joy brought Sarah running from the garden, and soon all 3 were laughing, making plans for the coming spring when their family would grow. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Luke's hand protectively covering where their child grew, Margaret reflected on how completely her life had transformed. I used to believe the frontier was a place of hardship and loneliness, she murmured, where only the strongest survived, and even they did so alone. Luke propped himself up on one elbow. And now, Margaret thought of the community that had rallied around them, of Sarah's unwavering support, of the home they were building together, a home that would soon echo with a child's laughter. Now I know that the frontier reveals what people are made of. Some break under its demands. Others discover strength they never knew they possessed. She touched his face gently. And some find that the wilderness is exactly where they were always meant to be, not alone, but with someone who sees them truly. "I see you, Margaret Thatcher," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The brave woman who stepped off a stagecoach and changed my world." Outside their window, the Montana stars shone brilliantly over the land that had witnessed their unlikely beginning and now held their future. Margaret had fled an arranged marriage seeking only escape, but had found instead a love born of choice and courage, a love strong enough to tame the wilderness both around and within them.